Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be covering a line in the open Sicilian with the black pieces that happens after e4, c5, knight f3, pawn to d6, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6. And today we're going to be covering the so-called Prins variation with the move pawn to f3. Now, if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. Now, there's actually a couple of ways that you can approach this move, pawn to f3, with the black pieces. You don't have to be totally committed to exactly one way to approach this, since there are really more than one good way to approach it. Now, the way I was brought up, my chess training, one of the big books of my youth was my 60 Memorable Games by Bobby Fischer. And of course, there was this game between Lombardi and Fischer that continued with the move knight to c6. And of course, I was very biased by this move, knight to c6, or actually, you can also play pawn to e6. Now, one of the ideas behind this move, pawn to f3, is they're holding this pawn with the pawn because they're intending to play pawn to c4 and basically play a Maroczy bind. So, what you're trying to argue with the black pieces is you can't really get away with playing a Maroczy bind from this move order. Like, black hasn't done the things that he's done in something like a Paulson Khan, where he's wasted a tempo with a move like pawn to a6. So this extra tempo should really matter. You shouldn't be able to get a bind on black, or basically prevent black from eventually playing the move d5, which is the whole point of playing a Maroczy bind in the first place. So in theory, if I'm very economical with my moves, if I'm very efficient with my moves with black, I should be able to get in d5 regardless. And that was kind of the argument in this game between Lombardi and Fischer that continued pawn to c4, pawn to e6, knight c3, bishop e7, bishop e3, castles kingside. So at this point, black is basically just threatening to play the move pawn to d5 on pretty much any white move. So I myself have played this line even recently, and a lot of players will just continue queen d2 here, and then d5 should be completely equalizing. This is at least equal for black, but I would say a lot of these lines are actually slight advantage black to possibly major advantage black. So an example is after we have this simplified position in the middle of the board, you would think, okay, black is ending up with this isolated pawn, but it's actually white with the problems. One of the issues is that because of this early f3 move, this bishop on e3 is not anchored. And again, anchoring for the middle game is a really important concept. Like, if you want to make it to the next level of your chess, you really need to keep track of whether or not the pieces in your position are anchored or unanchored. And it makes a really big deal. I think anchoring is something that up-and-coming players really need to focus on. They need to focus on whether or not their pieces are anchored, and it makes a big difference in so many positions. In this case, it basically means that black should be better, just because this piece is not anchored. And there's a number of ways that black can prove that advantage. So if, for example, bishop e2, you could just play bishop f6. This position should be slight edge black. The fact is that black has a lot of attacking chances involving rook e8, d4, possibly rook d8, focusing on this pawn. This position should just very simply be slight edge black without any fanfare. But what's interesting is black has other options too. Like, I personally prefer, at the very least, bishop h4, even if my intention is just to make this weakening and then retreat the bishop back to f6, I think this is a better version of it. But it is also possible to play this really cute idea, which should really be slight edge black, is to just play something like rook e8 and just offer up this bishop, because you are actually getting the material back. So if g takes h4, you're going to play pawn to d4, and then after this exchange of queens, we have bishop a6. And although black is down a pawn in this position, the initiative here for black is pretty massive. The computer gives this position as equal, so it seems to think with perfect play, white should be able to hold. But if anybody's better in this position, it's going to be black. White's pawn structure is a mess, and he has a very difficult time getting everything coordinated. So clearly this is very slight edge black at the very least, but it will only take one or two mistakes to turn this to major advantage black. White has to play very, very precisely to hold a draw here, and that's all he's hoping for, just trying to hold a draw at this point. So, in a nutshell, allowing early d5 probably isn't very good. Black equalizes very, very easily, and is possibly even slightly better. So, White needs to actually play the move that Lombardi played. White needs to play this move that Lombardi played against Fischer. He needs to play knight to c2. So if you're not familiar with that game, Fischer just played d5 anyway, which is basically a sacrifice of a pawn. And then we have cd5, ed5, and then knight d5 took place in that game. And then it was knight d5, queen d5, and then queen c7, which Fischer, gave an exclam. He thought this was very strong, and Fischer had tons and tons of play for this pawn that he gave up. That game continued queen b5, which apparently was kind of a second-rate move. Bishop b7, rook c1, knight b4, and as you can see, Lombardi is starting to get into all kinds of trouble. The main thing in these positions is this king is still stuck in the middle of the board, so it's easy for Black to continue to make threats in these types of positions. So, I mean, just to show you the finish of this game, knight b4, he sacrifices his queen, but he's getting that queen back. And of course, the whole point is, this bishop is not on pre because this knight is also on pre. So knight d5, we have bishop h4 check. Again, these themes repeating. g3, bishop f1, we can take. He could have taken the bishop, and the other bishop could have retreated. Whichever bishop he takes, the other one retreats. And, Fischer just ends up a clear exchange, and then he plays with perfect technique. Notice how he's attacking this pawn base here. The one thing that White has going for him is he has a very well-placed anchored piece in the middle of the board. I'm coming back to that concept of anchoring, very important. Fischer's trying to unanchor that piece, and that's the proper technique to try to win these positions. If he can unanchor that piece is now a loose piece. That loose piece can be attacked. That loose piece can be forced to move away from this very, very ideal square, and then Fischer can improve his position from here. Fischer was an absolute pro at doing stuff like this. Fischer's technique was just second to none when it came to improving positions and turning them into a win. And, basically just turning this position into an easy win now. He's got an outside passed pawn on the queen side, and that's really the end of the game. King d2, c4, and b6, followed by a5 is pretty much going to be a wrap at any point. Fischer locks up the kingside pawns first because that's perfect technique, and then he pushes this pawn and goes after the pawns that are now immobile, and White has to resign. So I was, very inspired by this game myself. I thought this was some really great stuff. And if we go back to the beginning of this line, it seems like, really great stuff. And I, of course, want to play like this because I've seen this game and I saw how successful this variation was for Black. But in modern practice, it runs into some problems. Now, interestingly enough, the notes in Fischer's games suggest this line with e takes d5, potentially knight b4, and then the line bishop c4. And I ran into this line myself in a couple games that I played online recently, and I got some very bad results with the black pieces. Eventually, I did find the line that Fischer recommended on my own, independently, and it ended up being still advantage White. I ended up still being in trouble, which is the line Fischer recommended with bishop f5, takes, castles, rook c8, and then we just, get our pawn back. But after even something as simple as queen d4, this is just very clearly advantage White. This pawn on d5 is a huge asset. White has two bishops, and Black's position is extremely, extremely difficult to play. So I was a little disheartened by this, and I think a lot of other players were a little disheartened by this, which is why a lot of people are no longer playing this knight c6, e6, d5 idea. Instead, they're playing early d5 ideas, in early e5 and d5 ideas in these positions. But you don't have to completely give up on Fischer's approach, because as I was doing my research for this video, actually, I discovered that there is actually another way to approach this position with the black pieces with the help of Stockfish, and that's the move that has apparently never really been tried, because I think a lot of strong players have, like I said, they've given up on this whole variation and gone to something that equalizes a little bit easier. This move b5 is very, very playable. And the whole point of b5 is, okay, so we can't take this pawn. So if knight takes b5, we can just play knight f takes d5. This should actually be slight edge black. So after takes, we're threatening queen a5 check. So knight c3 is obligatory, and then knight e3 takes, and then bishop e7. And black has the bishop pair, and white has no anchored pieces. This is more than enough compensation for the material. As a matter of fact, the computer gives this as advantage black. So then another way that this can get played is they can go in for bishop takes b5, and then we can play this knight takes b5, and according to the engine anyway, this is completely equal for black. Black is doing a-okay here. So b5, the only other way that white could really play it would be something like bishop to b3, which is relevant, and then we would have to take. And then if queen takes, we can play b4, and this is the main idea. And then after the knight retreats again, we can play knight takes d5, bishop f2. Knight simply retreats back to f6, and then this position should be completely equal. So there is a path to equality here for black, starting with the move pawn to b5. It's pretty clear that black can still completely equalize in this position very easily. Now, even if people are finding this position and finding this move on their engines, it is very tempting to simply play another line against this so-called Prins variation, because it seems like after pawn to f3, the move e5 seems like a very easy way to equalize, and this was also mentioned, by Fischer. So one of the ideas is, okay, yeah, they could play bishop b5. Check, knight on b to d7, knight f5, pawn to d5, and this is actually following a previous Fischer game. This was Cardosa versus Fischer, played in 1957. And then after e d5, we have a6, bishop d7, queen d7, knight e3, bishop c5, c4, b5 was completely equalizing. Fischer is breaking up the pawns, and he's going to be getting his pawn back in the middle of the board and getting a completely equal position where he actually has a little bit more space in the middle of the board. So again, if anybody's better, probably black. So you might think, well, what's the big deal about this e5 move? Well, if white plays any type of natural move, so if white plays knight b5, again, trying to take advantage of, white's little bit of activity, the issue is here is, unlike in other variations where knight b5 and aggressive moves make sense, we've wasted a move on a pawn move. And that's a big deal, because now we can play e5 and d5 in a lot of situations pretty rapidly. Now, in this case, we can't play d5 right away, because, if we take, we've got to worry about some knight c7 threats down the road. So if, for example, d5 takes, knight takes, we would have queen takes d5, knight c7 would be winning a whole piece for white. So we have to kick this knight away first, but after bishop e6, we are just threatening to play d5. So it seems like knight d5 is almost obligatory, but then after knight d5, e d5, bishop f5 is advantage black, and I've explained this type of advantage in other videos where this d-pawn is blocking our weakness on d6, and it's just a question of who has better pieces in the better center, and it's going to be black in this case. So this position should really be slight edge black, but it's probably closer to just equality. White has a little bit going for him in the form of a queenside pawn majority if he ever gets it moving. So each side has a little something to play for, but at the very least, black is completely equalized. So that leaves really just the move knight to b3, and then we can play d5 immediately. And this has been proven to equalize in a number of cases. I mean, just very simply put, like if they play e takes d5, we can just play knight takes d5, and there just isn't a great move here. We have this game, Smeets versus Swinkles, played in Dresden in 2007, continued with a3, knight c6, c4, knight b6, queen d8, and then king d8, bishop e3, knight a5, rook a2, bishop e6 was at the very least completely equal, but maybe just slight advantage black. And it was eventually black did go on to win, in Dresden in 2007 between those two players. So just allowing the capture on d5 doesn't make a ton of sense, though. Like a lot of strong players, they at least play bishop g5, but bishop e6 takes, queen takes, knight c3, bishop b4 takes, queen d1, king d1, gf6, knight b5, king d7 appears to be completely equal. So this was actually played between Karyakin and Ding Liren back in 2020, and that continued a3, bishop e7, king t1, rook c8. Black has some double pawns, but in exchange he has the bishop pair and he has a good center, so and he doesn't have any real development problems. After rook hc8, all the pieces have natural squares to come out to. So this should just be completely equal without any real fanfare. And it was. Black equalized very easily. After a few more exchanges, he didn't have any problems. Nothing was hanging, so people just shuffled their knights and rooks back and forth, and they shook hands, and they all went home. And that was in Karyakin versus Ding Liren back in 2020. So this is kind of the new, I would say modern main line is to play this early e5 with the idea of playing an immediate d5 and just claiming that we've equalized against this variation very easily. And of course, that's one of the reasons that f3 has fallen out of fashion, is because e5 and d5 right away is a simple line to remember, and it's very, very likely just completely equalizing. But that also, it doesn't mean that the Fischer approach was wrong. Again, with the Fischer approach, you can still take this Fischer approach of this early d5. I would say that just the main thing that you have to remember in this early d5 move is you do have to remember that after this early d5 move, where they've played, their knight c2 or whatever, and then you've castled, and then we've gone into this whole continuation where, like, after, say bishop e3, d5, and then we exchange everything. I would just say the main thing to remember here is once you hit bishop c4 is you need to remember this b5 move. And if you remember this b5 move, you're going to, at the very least, be completely equal, and I don't think you're getting into trouble in any of these lines. And I think that these positions are at least equal, but in many, many cases, you're looking at slight advantage black. So anyway, so that's how you play against this early f3 move. Those are basically the two main options that are available to you, and you should be able to equalize or get a slight advantage with black fairly easily. I hope that you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.